Hello and welcome back to another episode of You Want to Do What with Dan and Julie. Today we've got Alexander Sims on, who is a Formula E race driver. Hi Alexander.
Hi there, Daniel. Hi.
How are we today?
All good, thank you. All good.
Good.
All crazy in my house. We've got 3 kids.
Oh, blimey.
So it's just these evenings are always flat out. So it's nice to get a bit of a break.
Yeah, I bet. So, Formula E, how did you get into this world?
Well, pretty much it was through BMW, my previous employer as such, giving me the opportunity, asking me to get involved in Formula E, as they wanted me to do that. And so, yeah, it was very much their offer to me, and Formula E is pretty much I'd say that one of the top 3 motorsport series in the world. So I was absolutely only going to jump at the opportunity of driving in the championship. It's really good from a career point of view and very competitive, pretty rewarding, and a really interesting space to work in with everything being electric, which is a side that I'm very interested in. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
And so have you always wanted to be a race car driver, or this world of motorsport? Is that something you've always been into?
It has for a long time, yes. I wouldn't necessarily say that I've wanted to be a racing driver as such from an early age, but as soon as I started go-karting when I was about 10 years old, I really enjoyed it. And so it was a very serious hobby for some years. And as the years go by, you know that it gets more serious, and then you do obviously start to think of it as whether it can become a career. And then, yeah, having done it for maybe 6 or 8 years, by the time I was in my late teens, trying to make it into a job was pretty much my aim.
And how did that journey go? How did you sort of begin to get into the world of being a racing driver?
Well, I mean, it started, as I said, very much back in karting, just doing it as a hobby to start with and just gaining experience. And you don't realize it at the time, but you start to learn techniques and racecraft and all these things that come later in your career as a real bonus, as a real a strong point that you need to have ingrained in you, but you do it when you're young, obviously, just because it's fun and you're just having a laugh. But inevitably, you do go through that process. You know, you always want to try and be better as a sportsman. It's I guess the trait that many people have, you know, to try and improve continuously. And over the years, it's been a process that you don't, as I said, you don't really even notice it sometimes. But when you actually look back over many years, you realize the improvements that you've made. And the go-karting started off being just, as I say, a hobby, but got to sort of national, international level go-karting. But to be honest, it wasn't a career. You know, that it sounds impressive by saying you're doing like world championships and things, but this was very, very much still us funding it as ultimately a hobby. Then moving into car racing, I was able to again do a few seasons of single seaters, which is like Formula Renault and Formula 3, sort of on the ranks going up, and was able to get some backing, able to honestly transfer the funding of it over to an investor, because it started to get extortionate, you know, the numbers
I bet, yeah.
involved. And then got a lucky break with BMW, really.
Is that how it works as a if somebody wants to be a racing driver, they progress through these ranks and then they go and get a sponsor and hopefully they take on the costs? Is that the normal route?
I mean, yeah, it sounds quite simplistic when you put it like that.
Yeah.
In reality, it's not as simple as that. A lot of people will be self-funding their careers. Obviously, not themselves when they're young; it's through their family. Um, and to be honest, yeah, continue to fund it themselves through to um, really, like, if you were to take Formula One as an example,
Mm.
it would likely be the step before Formula One, which is Formula Two. They would still be self-funding it.
Oh my
Um,
God. What kind
and
of money
so
is involved in self-funding a Formula 2?
I'm I don't know exact numbers, but you're
Yeah.
probably talking at like 1.5 million a year.
Wow.
So it's a rich man's game, honestly. And it's one thing that I guess we might touch on later, but I struggle with the sport in that sense because it's just not accessible to everyone, you know.
Yeah.
It's got so many good things about the sport, but to be a racing driver, um, as with many industries, you need to have experience, and you can't get that experience if you haven't got money to go. Even go-karting, you know, you're talking tens of thousands of pounds a year that people are spending for not as accessible as, you know. I'm sure going to be a professional footballer is more complicated than just buying some boots and a football, but
Mm.
you know, you can buy boots and a football and start practicing and set up a goal, and you know, you can start going through the processes of learning skills and things. But in motorsports, and so I'd say it's probably the same in motorbikes as well as cars. You need to buy the car or go-kart, and you need to buy tires, you need to tune the engines. You know, there's all sorts of different fees that are just constantly needing to be spent to continue just doing the sport, you know.
Yeah. And
And
so
so it's pretty difficult in that sense.
the process of working your way up through the categories of races and styles of races, and then getting a sponsor, is that a really difficult thing to do? And are there certain things you have to do to get a sponsor?
I think I mean, again, so some people are able to make it work and do get really good sponsorship, and are able to pay for either a decent chunk or all of their junior career through sponsorship or, I guess, investments. You have some young driver programs that some of the manufacturers will fund to try and access the best talent so that they can have those drivers driving for them, obviously, if they get to Formula One. But in terms of the total numbers, those are fairly few and far between. I would say that it's really not easy to find sponsorship. It's purely down to the fact that, you know, Formula One is the one single-seater motorsport category anyway that people have historically watched. Formula E, I would say, is a growing space, but has other relevance as well in terms of it being electric. But the junior Formula E just don't get coverage. You know, there's only a certain amount of motorsport that the public can ingest on a weekend. You know, and so getting coverage to be able to justify hundreds of thousands of pounds of sponsorship per year is quite difficult. And so that's again why it falls back on wealthy families and people's situations where they do have access to wealth to be able to get that experience.
So the car manufacturers' sort of young driver programs, is that very difficult to get into? Do they go around scouting people? How does it work?
Yeah, they would ordinarily have contacts in the junior Formula. I'm sure the team bosses in Formula One have their people directly underneath them to keep an eye on things, and I'm sure they would watch some racing themselves as well occasionally. And yeah, you would probably get a small handful of drivers, even each year is a bit much, but yeah, probably got two or three drivers. I mean, around the world, I'm talking, not in the UK, around the world that will get picked up each year and then drafted into a young driver program as such, which is obviously a dream ticket for those people that do get them. But equally, the person who wins the Formula 3 championship, for instance, might get on that program, and they've got the lucky next few years to have a manufacturer pay for their racing and develop them and give them access to all the useful data and information to improve their driving and fitness and everything. But the person who finishes second, who doesn't get there, they might not even be worse. They might have been in a slightly worse team. The car setup might not have allowed them to drive as fast, but they get nothing. So they have to try again the next year.
Wow.
And the next year. So yeah, it's a funny sport in that sense.
It is. So you mentioned your first role was BMW, was it? In the sport?
Yeah, my first professional role was with BMW. Yes, I was with McLaren for a couple of seasons before then, but it was sort of an unpaid role. Equally, I wasn't having to bring any money to go racing, which was the first step that I needed to make, I guess, to being professional. But I was able to get lots of experience in a GT car in a McLaren, which was very useful. But then I got the opportunity with BMW to get paid to go racing.
Wow,
which was pretty cool. And then the journey with them to just this summer when I switched teams from BMW to a new team for me in Mahindra in Formula E, an Indian car firm. It's been quite a roller coaster, an amazing journey that I wouldn't have predicted 5 years ago.
Wow. And so as a Formula E and a racing driver in general, what's an average day like? Are you training? Is there physical training and then learning tracks, or how does it work?
It's a bit of a funny job in that there's not too many average days, I would say. When we're at the racetrack, that's a fairly standard day I set, I guess, but it's not like we're there all the time at all. As I've mentioned probably too much already, motorsport is expensive, so we can't be at the track all the time at all. We're at the track on the race weekends and then a select number of days through the year. Like in Formula E, we have, I think, 13 days total for the team, and there's 2 drivers, so you're likely to get around 6 or 7 test days outside of the race weekends.
Wow, that's not a lot, is it?
It's really not a lot, again, when you compare to other sports. Footballers, tennis players, rugby players, whatever, they're training day in, day out, constantly doing the thing that they've got to do at the weekend when they're under the spotlight.
Yeah.
Whereas we have, you have your 2 45-minute practice sessions on a race weekend to tune in, and then you've got time qualifying and you've got to perform. So
wow, that's incredibly, that's a big ask, isn't it? It's a really big ask.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I guess it comes back to then the importance of having that experience over many, many years.
Yeah.
And why you need to start so young.
Do you get to use maybe simulators or things like that to train on?
We do. And that they're not actually as I would say as important as one might think in terms of the actual practicing of driving and driving fast. We use simulators a lot in Formula E because there's a lot of information that the driver and the team need to speak about during the race in terms of your energy consumption, how efficient you're being, the way the race is panning out with how other people are using their energy and things. And so we're talking about that, and the simulator is really helpful for practicing your communication and practicing the procedures. But because you don't have the G-forces in a simulator in a sort of computer game environment, it's really difficult to replicate the feeling that you get on track.
Yeah, that's. I was talking about this actually with my girlfriend's family the weekend. We were talking about electric cars and how people are now starting to think about actually my next car might be electric, and then we got on to the sort of topic of their acceleration, because an electric car's acceleration is instant, isn't it? There's no delay. It's like turning a power switch on, essentially. And
exactly that.
It's mad how fast these cars accelerate. So is there different G forces you're going to have to get used to, or just a quicker acceleration?
I mean, it's just more instant. So, I
Yeah.
mean, the amount of power that the car has is quite comparable to other racing cars that I drive.
Right.
So, once you're accelerating, the feeling is similar. But the difference is you press the throttle quickly, you get the power instantly.
Yeah.
You're not having to bring the RPM up and then balance the clutch and release the clutch. And, you even compared to in a racing environment on a racing start in a combustion engine car, you're obviously trying to launch as fast as possible, but
Mm.
still, compared to an electric car, it's quite a lazy process. Obviously, we're talking about small margins of difference in a racing
Yeah.
scenario, but on the road, it's something that the average driver can access that instant acceleration really easily in an electric car, whereas you can't really do a racing start very easily in a Ford Mondeo.
No. Is it something that really excites you to be involved with Formula E as early as you have been involved with it? Because I guess it is the future of racing, really, isn't it?
It's extremely exciting to be a part of. In my personal life, I've been very interested in sustainability and renewable energy for many years. I bought an electric car back in 2012 and have driven electric cars ever since. So
Wow, that's
I've been
early, isn't
really,
it?
yeah, I was one of the earlier ones. So I've been sold on the whole idea of electric vehicles and the benefits that they can bring for some time. And so to now merge that with my racing career is a really nice synchronization of my two interests. But in terms of Formula E being the future of racing, I think it's part of the future.
Hmm.
I think electric racing, depending on the style of racing, can be very good or does have its drawbacks. For endurance racing, for example, like say the Le
Mm.
Mans 24 Hours, at the moment, there's just not the capabilities of a battery to be able to drive in a comparable way to a combustion engine does at the
Yeah.
moment, for like an hour at a time, flat out, and then recharge in 30 seconds fully to do another hour.
Yeah.
Petrol has so much energy in it, it's crazy. You have seen petrol when it ignites, it explodes. A
Yeah.
battery will burn, okay, it has some energy, but it will burn slowly. And so to replace that fuel tank in terms of the amount of energy with a battery is a big challenge. But we don't have those challenges with normal day-to-day cars, thankfully, because with a normal size battery already in an electric car, you can get sort of 250, 300 miles of range, which I think is pretty sufficient for most people. But the
I,
racing environment has massive challenges, I think.
Yeah, I guess that's something you don't really think about as well, because cars were designed for the weight of an engine at the front or the back or whatever it be, but battery packs are now just flat across the bottom of cars, aren't there? Many designs. So I guess there's
Yeah.
going to be a learning curve in manufacturing and really fine tuning electric cars to be as fine tuned as their petrol, the petrol alternatives.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, already from 10 years ago to now, we've made big improvements as an industry, I would say, in terms of how electric vehicles are packaged and built and designed. And yes, I'm sure that process will only continue. I mean, the electric cars less than 20 years old, the combustion engine cars like 120 years old, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm sure there will still be improvements to be made.
And so what's your job like? Are you traveling a lot? Are you away from home a lot? What's the actual the job like on a yearly basis?
In a normal year, I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
2020 permissions
yeah.
aside, yes, there's a lot of traveling. I would say on average I would do 20 race weekends a year, and almost all of those would be abroad. Plus, there's testing in between times, simulator days, and so yeah, I travel a lot,
Yeah.
and as I said, the vast majority of those are on flights. So um, it's a bit difficult, the amount of time away from family,
Mm.
now that I've got kids, particularly. But the very lucky, fortunate thing, rather, about, I'd say, being a racing driver is that outside of race weekends, the work that I need to do, I can largely do it at home. And so I don't need to go into the office on a Monday morning, having just got back from a race weekend on Sunday night. I can spend a few days at home and catch up on things whilst being around in the evenings easily.
And what would you say are some personality traits that really help drivers thrive in the industry?
It's an interesting one because there are a lot of different personalities that I've come across in terms of racing drivers. Um, I think there's the sort of the cliche of the racing driver wearing his sunglasses and having quite a big ego and sort of very very self confident. But it's not always the way at all. Not everyone's a sort of James Hunt
Yeah.
wannabe. But I think it's got to be similar traits to any successful person in business or sport. A lot of determination is needed, self-reflection and self-improvement through the years to look inwards on what you can do to improve your driving skills. And yeah, perseverance as well is a big one because the opportunities are few and far between. And I think there's many drivers out there who are even now in Formula One who would admit that at one point or another they considered quitting because they couldn't find an opportunity. You just have to keep persevering and pushing the contacts that you can get hold of to give you a chance. And sometimes it'll take quite a few years, which I guess in a normal office job as such is maybe not such a concern, but with the fairly time limited career that you've got in motor racing, likely end of career is probably 35 or 40. If you're sat there at 20 and you don't have an option, persevering for another 3 or 4 years feels like quite a lot of your career potential is being lost. But you got to keep going if you want it.
So some of the biggest positives you've had out of the industry so far?
I think the emotions involved in the sport are fantastic. The swing of emotions that you go through. I've had plenty of times where I've felt terrible after losses and mistakes and crashing cars and things. But having had those, to then get a good result, to win a 24-hour race or get pole position in qualifying or something, makes it so sweet. So the roller coaster of emotions that you go through is probably the first thing that I really enjoy about the industry, because it's a sport. I guess you get that in every sport. But I'd say a big part of it is just the team environment as well that you work in. Obviously, when you're out on track, you're on your own in the car, but there's a whole group of people behind you working in the pits, back at the factory, developing the cars, working on the software, working out your strategy, understanding the tire temperatures and how they work best. And there's just a whole raft of engineers analyzing, working away, giving you information to help you do it.
Feel the pressure of all those people who have worked on this car for you, and like you say, so many people involved in a team. Do you ever feel that pressure when you're out there?
When I'm out on track, I don't, to be honest, no. Then just driving the car around and driving it to its maximum is taking up all of my brain power. The time that hits home is after I make a mistake and I crash the car or I cause the result to be worse than it needed to be. You then have that sense of letting these people down. But to be honest, that feeling has got easier over the years. I've learned to accept my mistakes better, because I realize as I go through life that everyone makes mistakes,
Yeah.
We all try our best, but sometimes you don't make the right decision in the heat of the moment or whatever. And the person who's maybe developing the traction control or deciding what tire temperatures to put in the car, if they make a mistake, then the traction control just doesn't work quite perfectly. And then I come back in and say, this needs to be improved. Or the tire pressures get a bit too hot and you go slightly slower. But if I make a mistake, it results in me crashing into the barrier and the race is over. So it looks far more dramatic. But we all make mistakes, and that's just the reality of, when I make a mistake in the wrong way, then it looks really bad. But that's not my fault necessarily. That's just part of the job that I do,
Yeah. And on the other side of that, what's some of the less favorable parts of the industry?
I would say that the biggest one for me is probably what I touched on at the start, in terms of the amount of money that it costs to get into the sport. I have been very fortunate in my situation to have relatively wealthy parents who are able to fund my racing, but I experienced too many people along the way who couldn't continue to pay for it, and were just as good, if not better than me at times. And so to see those people not be able to fulfill their dreams purely down to the amount of money in their parents' bank account, that's pretty sad, to be honest. Quite sad. But equally, you put things into perspective, there are other problems in life that are worse, but just in a racing sense, the amount of money, honestly, is probably the most negative thing, because once you're involved in the industry and able to be working in it professionally, there are not many downsides to it. It's a brilliant industry to be involved in, but access to it is probably difficult.
And we like to talk about what people can expect to earn average salaries. So we usually go away and we find stats on the industry earnings. And I have to say, it was really difficult for racing drivers, because it varied so much. And like you say, for a lot of the time, you're the one actually investing in the industry. You're paying money to go karting or whatever it be, until you get to a point where you get a contract. So essentially we couldn't really put our finger on an average number. But I guess it's fair to say that once you're in there and once you're actually in a secure position, your earning potential is still very varied, but it's a decent income.
Yes, I mean you hit it bang on the head there. The average income varies so much. I started off in GT racing, and my first contract, if I remember rightly, was for 35,000 euros, which at the time I was happy with. It was the first money that I'd made.
Yeah.
But in GT racing, in sort of endurance racing at Le Mans and things, honestly, the average salary is probably around, I'd say, 150, 200,000 euros, something like that.
Yeah.
So pretty reasonable. And then in Formula E, Formula One, it varies up to, obviously you've got the top guys in Formula One earning tens of millions, but I would say, like Formula E is probably around 500,000-600,000. And Formula One is probably closer to 1 to 2 million, something like that.
Wow. I guess we have to remind people and balance this against the investment that you've made up front. These, obviously the earnings are great, but you're essentially, it's like paying to go to university. I guess you might pay £200,000 or whatever it is to go to university. So it kind of offsets it, I guess, is the end of it.
I mean, you don't go into motorsport to be a racing driver to make money.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, the vast majority of people will lose a lot of money, and the amounts that even I am earning now are what some people will be spending in a year
Wow.
in the like Formula 3 and things. So if you've done many years of single seaters, you'll probably be like, you could quite possibly be 5 million, 6 million pounds down in the red.
Wow.
And so suddenly the earning total doesn't look that great.
Doesn't sound as good, yeah.
The prospects of making it to be a Lewis Hamilton are not very high. And you've got, I don't know what, 20 people on each Formula 3, Formula 2 grid each year spending big money. And so, yeah, it's very fortunate for those who do make it, but it's a very bad financial game if you want to do it for that reason.
So is there something that's you would say would not be in the job description, but you have to deal with as a racing driver?
I would say that there's not a huge amount that springs to mind. I mean, as I say, really just determination and perseverance are the traits that I would say. But in terms of a specific role that you're doing, I don't know what people's perceptions are. I guess
maybe
engineering knowledge is quite helpful. But you don't need to be an engineer. You just need it's helpful to be able to talk to the engineers, understanding what they're saying.
Yeah. Maybe publicity, having to, if you're on big teams, you might have to do some publicity stuff.
Yeah, there's quite a necessity to be comfortable in front of a camera, and to be able to, I guess, switch on a bit of a more exaggerated side to yourself. And I certainly find it strange in Formula E. We do filming at the start of each season for like GIFs, so that when you have crashes or you get on pole position, they can put a little GIF in the bottom corner of the screen, like an animated picture.
Yeah.
And they film that in this cold awning with a green screen behind you, and suddenly you've got to like, boom, you've won a race. Imagine that.
My God.
I haven't won a race. And I feel really awkward.
It's like those awful things. The awful things they do with the like they get the footballers and the rugby players to do actions in front of green screens to put up while they're playing, and it's just so awkward, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So being able to switch off your brain and just do what's asked of you sometimes is probably quite helpful.
Yeah.
But that again takes a bit of time to get good at. Certainly wasn't very comfortable to start with.
And would you still go into the industry knowing everything you know now?
Yes, because it's so good to be able, having succeeded, I guess, at being able to make it to a professional. It's fantastic, but the journey along the way was just as good. And if for whatever reason, whether I decided to stop or finances dictated we had to stop when I was, say, 18 years old and we just did go-karting, then I would have still loved it, And so I think knowing that I would have gone into it, even if I knew it was only going to be for a couple of years or something, I would still give it a go and enjoy it. Yes.
Well, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you, Alexander, and thank you so much for coming on.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
And just before you go, could you let everybody know where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, on Twitter and Instagram, I'm just at Alexander Sims, with one M in Sims. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alexander.
Super. Thanks very much.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.